Your grandmother being black does not make you black. Let's talk about that. So, before I start, if you see me looking to the side, I am looking at my notes. So, that's just a disclaimer, right? Now, I think it's about time that we said it as it is. And I know that a lot of people don't like hearing it because honestly, that is valid. Like it shakes at the core of your identity, that the foundation of your identity. But honestly, it's the truth. You can have black ancestry, but racially you're not black. And in fact, I might go on a stretch here and say that if you have to prove that you're black, you may not be black racially, that is. Now, what do I mean by that? And why did I emphasize especially that last part? Right? I say this because race is a separate concept to ethnicity, ancestry, and heritage. While ethnicity, ancestry, and heritage indicate your roots, which part of the world you come from, and who your ancestors are, race is more so a social construct and largely relies on society's perception and racist power structures that enforce said perception. With this said, with this said, this makes us understand that while your ethnicity, as I will most likely refer refer to from here on, while your ethnicity is relatively solid, your racial categorization is not. It is subjective and unfortunately very shaky due to its subjective nature. What does that mean? It means that, in a nutshell, it can mean that today you may be white, considered white, the next day you might be considered black. And just for context, for this video essay, I will talk primarily about black and white people. Now, and with that said, I'm sure you can imagine the type of effects it has on everything from privilege to social interactions to how communities define who is black, or to even something as mundane as the usage of the N word, right? Now, for the first part, which should be the longest part, I will talk about race and what it means. Now, like I said before, race is a social construct that is largely dependent on society's perception. But what do I really mean by that? As stated by the American by the AAA, the American Anthropological Association, that was a mouthful. Races not race races are not rooted in biology, but it's a social category shaped by historical and political forces. I'm paraphrasing here, but that's the idea. And just for context, anthropologists are social scientists that study the origin, development, and behaviors of humans, analyzing cultural, social and physical characteristics across past and present societies. So these people, because I don't want to say the name again, these people like Michael Omi and Howard Winant, I apologize if I mispronounced that. They argued that these two scientists, especially, they argued that race is a social formation and not a genetic truth created through political and cultural processes, right? And if you really want to get scientific, because if you really want to get scientific, studies show that studies on human genetics confirm that humans share over 99% of DNA across populations, regardless of race, which would render the old biological definition of race to be invalid, which and this biological definition kind of how can I say, it validated the categorization into racial groups due to different features or different genetic variations according to these group of people in a nutshell, which is not true, right? Because you can still use those same like conditions that categorize the larger people into races in the various racial groups. So it essentially renders it invalid, right? So biologically, races, like even in science, race is nowhere to be found, right? And sorry. So when we look at all of that, what really is race, right? What really is race then? And instead of giving you a standard definition like I just unloaded, which would and it would probably bore you, I'll give you an idea so you can conceptualize what race is, right? Imagine you go in a store and the cashier is just so happens to be quite fair in complexion, somewhat narrow nose bridge, straight hair, uh maybe thinner lips. What race would you assume she was? And I'm going to answer that for you because you don't think about this intentionally, but it's subconscious and that's not your fault. But I'm going to answer that for you. You're going to immediately think that she's white. It's just going to be immediate that she's white, right? But what if you strike a conversation with her and she mentions her mother who is black, which would technically make her mixed and technically make her somewhat black, so not just white? Would you so would you really so tell me, right? Tell me. Like after categorizing her as white and then she tells you that she's black, like she tells you her mom is black, so she's like quite black, like way blacker than you might forgive my language, but she's way blacker than you expected originally. What then? What then would you classify her as? Now there's like a conflict, right? Because tell me, was she racially black when you walked in? I don't think so. Or did she only become black once she told you? I don't think so. If race depended on lineage alone, then it really shouldn't matter. It really, but in reality, it does. Because you're not going to automatically start treating her as a fellow black person, or even on a stretch, a mixed person. Because you already treated her as a white person because she looks white. And I'm not saying that ethnically, like, her heritage is mixed. She has black ancestry. I will not deny that. I will not be the person to erase that. But racially, did you ever see her as mixed? And will you ever find a way to see her as mixed? Now, sorry. If you were going to treat her as white before she told you about her mother, then for all social purposes in this interaction, she was racialized as white, essentially rendering her white. And that basically summarizes about how race operates in real life. Now, don't get me wrong, I will reiterate. Ethnicity wise, she is not Caucasian. She is partly Caucasian, but she didn't even mention her dad. She didn't even mention her dad. Maybe her dad is also black. Maybe she's fully black. All we know is her mom is not white. All we know is her mom is black. So that already makes her 50% negative Caucasian. So for all we know, she's probably even fully black. And ethnicity wise, that's what she is. And if I were to say that she was Caucasian just because she looked Caucasian, it would be borderline erasure of her identity. But due to her features and the social context, she is racially categorized as white, and she will be treated as a white person would because she looks like a white person. Does that make sense? If you understand this small microcosm, then you're going to understand the rest of what I'm going to talk about in this video. It's going to be very easy for you to understand, and you'd be able to apply it into real world politics or even in just your environment. Now, for example, actual in the actual world, light-skinned individuals or white passing black people are treated differently. Obviously not the same way that light skins, like obviously black light skins are treated, because I'm talking about there's a difference between you being light skinned and you being light skinned. When you're light skinned, it's clear that you're black. People can tell that you're black. When you're light skinned, it's usually referring to people who are they are black or even black adjacent, but they are so white passing that you really cannot just call them light skin, if that makes sense. And light skinned individuals, they are treated better than dark skins, but it's not to the extent that light skinned people and white passing black people are treated. They're treated better due to colorism. White passing people are treated better because they are considered white. It's different. Now, and it's also not just, contrary to popular belief, it's not just mixed people who are treated as white people. There are fully black people who are white presenting because they lack melanin, right? And they are also treated as white. So it's not just mixed people, it's also fully black people, right? And I would like to stress again that being treated as white does not erase ancestry, but it does change your racial reality. You and I are not going to experience the same thing just because we're ethnically white and ethnically black. We are racially not the same category. Now, for the second part, to transition out of the race part, I'm going to make a small section for tensions. And that is tensions concerning this conversation, like this discourse, right? And in these type of conversations, tensions often arise between ancestry and lived racial experience, particularly when visibly black individuals describe their experience of racism or colorism rooted in how they are perceived. White passing individuals who also identify as black may or may not attempt to relate based on ancestry, but they are more often than not met with resistance from those who argue that their lived racial positioning is fundamentally different. If that sounded like a mouthful to you, because these are, like I said, I'm reading from my notes. And this made a lot more sense when I was writing it. So me reading it out loud makes a little less sense. Let me simplify it. Usually when they're during these conversations, there are visibly black people like myself and let's say light-skinned or white-passing individuals. And visibly black people, I'll just say dark-skinned, would usually recount their experience of racism, prejudice, or even colorism because of how they look. And white passing individuals would try to pitch in and try to relate because, well, they're also black. But dark skinned individuals would push them. They would not push them away, but they would retort with the fact that don't say that you relate to what I experienced because we're both black ethnically, because you're not black racially. And that's the truth, honestly. And this is the point where accusations of gatekeeping often emerge from the white passing individuals but what's actually being contested isn't ancestry, it's lived racialization. The disagreement isn't about who has black roots, but rather about who is socially positioned as black in ways that expose them to anti black treatment. So when dark skins say that you cannot relate because you're not black racially, they're not saying that the term black only belongs to us. We're not saying that because we are all black ethnically, but racially, we're not all black. And that's honestly the truth because you will not experience the same type of anti-black treatment that I will experience. In fact, sometimes you will experience none because you're not perceived as black. Meanwhile, I will experience a lot of anti-black treatment because I am perceived as black. Despite us all being black, we're not all black, if that makes sense. The third part, which is a conversation of much tension, is the usage of the N word, which is honestly the one of the main inspirations behind me talking about this. Now, let's take the usage of the N word for example. It is a word tied to years of historical oppression against black people, that is, people perceived as black. It's not tied to genetics. White passing black people are less likely to experience the anti-black racism that comes with it the same way a visibly black person would which leads us to the conversation around who can or cannot use the word. This is a very touchy conversation because, for whatever reason, everyone wants to use the N word, even the Caucasians. And everyone is going to fight to say, oh, I can use the N word. I can use the N word. I can use the N word. I'm black. I'm half black. I'm fully black. But it's not because of your genetics. It's not because your your lineage. It's not because of your ancestry that dark skins use the N word. It's because of it's because of the context. Let me put it that way. Of course, it's important to note that due to the subjective nature of racial categorization, there are no set rules on who can or cannot use the word. I am not going to give a set rule because there are no set rules. Anything that is as subjective cannot really have objective rules. We can have understanding, but we cannot have objective rules. But let me give you a scenario that I usually use when I try to explain my stance on who can or cannot use the N word. An appropriate way I use personally as a Cameroonian would be during if we were alive during German, French, or British Cameroon, during any of these three eras of Cameroon's history, would you be out in the fields? Would you would you be in the houses? Would you be working out in the fields under the sun? Would you be in the house working as a maid? Or would you be one of the lucky few who are adopted by a white family? Or a more popular example I can use is if we were alive during post slavery America, would you how hard or how easy would it be for you to infiltrate white spaces? If you would be able to infiltrate white spaces easily, you might not be eligible to use that word. No further comments. And hopefully, those examples or scenarios I've given can help drive the point home that ancestry really doesn't ensure your blackness, but rather lived racialization. And this obviously means that ancestry won't automatically grant you some sort of allowance to say the N-word whatsoever. No further comment. Now, to the last part of this essay is, why does this matter in the modern society? Like, why are we even having these conversations? How is it going to help us? Now, like I said, some may ask, why does this matter? Trust me, I used to ask that before I became woke. Oh, sorry. It really does matter a lot, especially if you're black, especially if you're a person of color. I think every group of color should have these type of conversations around race and racial categorization, because it exists in every POC, in every group of color, not just black people. It's just I am black, so I am best experienced to speak on black issues, right? But I encourage that everyone should have these type of conversations. Even if you're white, you should have these type of conversations concerning people of color. Not in a degrading way, but in a way of to educate yourself, right? To inform yourself. And why does it really matter? It matters because because the moment one confuses ancestry for lived experience, especially in conversations aiming at producing fruitful discourse, it leads to a misunderstanding of one's privilege, or even dismissal of another's dismissal or even dismissal of their privilege, which would lead to erasure of another's experience. What does this mouthful mean, basically? It basically means that, let's take a white passing person and a visibly black person, right? If a white passing person and a visibly that, and this has happened to me before, okay? If a passing person and a visibly black person have a conversation on this, and that passing person decides to say, decides to like decides to misunderstand their privilege or even dismiss it, which most usually do, it would essentially erase the visibly black person's experience. Let me put it in a little bit more context. Say I'm having a discussion about this with a white passing person about a racial aggression that was made at me. I know that it was made at me because I am black presenting, because I am visibly black. It wasn't made at me for no other reason, especially if it was racial. It was made at me because I am visibly black. But if a white passing person who obviously profits from white privilege tells me or ignores their white privilege, refuses to admit that, oh, well, they suffer from white privilege, or tries to relate to my experience, even though they will never experience that because they are white presenting, then it essentially makes my experience invalid by saying by saying that it didn't happen to you because you're black. It erases my experience. It erases my lived experience, if that makes sense. Now, and I know, no, I forgot to say something. You can have, no, I forgot to say something. There's something else I forgot. It erases my experience. And it also leads to misreadings of oppression and social treatment, like microaggressions, and causes identity politics conflicts. Many visibly black people, like myself, experience microaggressions on the daily, right? Or even monthly, in some way or another. And we are usually honed or groomed from childhood to be able to spot these microaggressions. But if I'm having a conversation with a white passing person who most likely doesn't experience these microaggressions because they are perceived as white, and they dismiss this aspect of it, it would dismiss the fact that these microaggressions are very real. It pushes it to the side, which sadly happens a lot. when Black women, especially Black women, go on the internet, for example, and talk about a microaggression that happened to them, many people, especially other Black people who are white passing, are quick to go into the comments and say, "You're imagining it. That wasn't a microaggression. You wouldn't know." Or they would say, "I'm Black and I don't experience that." It may seem very oblivious and opaque, but that's the type of conversation that happens on the daily. Those are the type of comments that go out on the daily because people aren't having these conversations. And I and race race as perception based explains societal patterns like discrimination, privilege, and systemic bias. Now, to conclude, to be clear, I am not denying ancestry or erasing heritage. I would never do that. It's more so about understanding that ancestry and racial experience are not the same thing. You can have Black ancestry and be racially positioned as Black in the society because race and I'm sorry, I misspoke. You can have Black ancestry and not be racially positioned as Black in the society because race moves not through your genetics, not through your ancestry, but socially through perception, power, and treatment, and not through family trees, like I said. And I know that makes people uncomfortable. It would make anyone uncomfortable, but because it essentially shakes out the foundation of many people's identity. But honestly, race being as subjective as it is was never meant to be stable. It was always meant it is a concept that is constructed and enforced, and it shifts depending on who holds power. And like I like to say, if your Blackness only exists once announced, then you're no longer talking about your race. Thank you.